Okay, so welcome back, everyone, for another session of the GS UK Security Working Group. With us on this session, which is 7J, we've got Mark Nelson. Everyone knows Mark Nelson, so I won't spend any time introducing him. He's, the name itself says it all. Mark today will be covering the RACF update, zOS 3.1 and 3.2. Now, because there's a lot of material to be covered, I would be asking you, if you have any questions, to post them on the chat window, and then at the end, Nelson will answer all of your questions. So without further delays, Mark, the floor
Let's
is
get to
yours.
this. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to say good morning for those of you who are here in places like where I am. Good afternoon to those folks who are in more timely places. And if you're watching this on the recording, I hope you find it enjoyable. I'm Mark Nelson, been a member of the RACF development team for 38 years now and an IBM for 43. And it's my privilege to talk to you about zOS 3.1 and RACF. Originally, the title was And More, but since we've announced zOS 3.2, I can include some of that material. Tell you a little bit about some of the things I do outside of all of this RACF and security stuff. I am a private pilot. That lower left photo is me piloting my Cessna 172 that I share ownership with 55 of my closest friends. And I'm also a volunteer docent on a Placid Lassie. Placid Lassie is a C-47 that flew 2 missions on D-Day in Normandy, is still flying. It's about 2 miles from my house right now, and has been back to Normandy 3 times. It went back in for the 70th, 75th, and last year for the 80th commemoration. My wife and I flew over, not on it, on American Airlines, because it's way more comfortable, and we were tour guides up in North Weald, which was the base of operations before it started traversing through Europe. I'm also the director of the Mid-Hudson Valley IBM course. All fun things to do. So I mentioned that we are going to be talking a little bit about zOS 3.2, and I do have to give you the fine print, which says zOS 3.2 is not yet generally available. We had a preview announcement in second week of April of this year, and plans change. Now, we don't announce things unless we're pretty darn sure they're going to happen, but directions and things might change, and things that I talk about in 3.2 might not happen. So just be aware of that. I'm fully confident they will, but that's the fine print. So zOS 3.2, we've got some stuff there. I can only talk about that which is in the announcement letter or the preview announcement letter. The link is right there. And there are 2 things we're going to talk about from that announcement letter, and that is granular dataset encryption support and or support for digital certificates which have multiple subject alternate names. Then we could talk about some of the other things we've done. We'll talk a little bit about zOS 3.1. We have some 3.1 only things. And then we have continuous delivery. I say zOS 2.5. These are things that we've rolled back to 2.5 or 3.1. But they are functional things that are made available in the APAR/PTF stream. And then there are a couple of statements direction we'll just talk about very, very briefly. All right, let's get to this. zOS 3.2. This was the #1 requirement on our list for quite a while now, and that was support for multiple subject alternate names. We've been able to generate certificates in RACF for a very, very long time now. But one of the restrictions when you're using RACDcert to generate a certificate is you could have precisely one subject alternate name. Now, if you're using PKI services, that other component in zOS, you could have multiple subject alt names. But if you're using RACDcert, you were limited to 1. So we've got 2 things that we're changing. #1 is you can generate certificates with multiple subject alt names. And #2, closely related to #1, is you could use RACDcert list to actually see those multiple alternate names. And while we were at it, we decided to put in the authority key ID and the subject key ID. These are two values that are derived from the public keys of the associated certificates. And it's kind of a standard way of giving you a handle for what the certificate is. So RACDcert, GenCert, you had the alt name keyword, the things which are unbolded were the existing keywords like IP, domain, email, and URI. And now if you want to have multiple of them, you would specify a IP for alternate, a domain, a email, and a URI. And notice that for each of them, you can put lists of what those entries are to be. So that's the RACDcert GenCert command alteration. There are a couple of limitations. Any of the places where you're allowed to have a 255 character value, domain name, email, places like that, we are limiting you to 250 characters. That's due to some internal restrictions. And if you're using database unload, SMF unload to process the SMF records that are created with these new fields, you may find that some information is truncated, but we indicate very clearly in the SMF unload output what has been truncated. So if you do a RACDcert list, this is what it looks like. So in the past, where we would have said IP and given you one IP address, then one email address, one domain name, one URI, now you'll see as many as are in the certificate. So that's our multiple subject alt name support, and the addition of the authority key ID and subject key ID, those are just emitted as new text in the RACDcert list command. Those values should match what you're seeing from other places that you might have these certificates stored and are listing them. So if you go into Windows and look at the key rings and the certificates you have, the value for auth key ID there should match what you have in RACF. Granular data set encryption. So we went down the path of pervasive encryption for data sets quite a while ago, and we're on 8 or 9 years since that has been introduced. And the way we did it, and the way our friends in DFSMS did it with us, is we gave you the ability to specify a key label in the DFP segment of a data set profile. And that's pretty much all you could say. And that key label would apply to any data set that was covered by that particular data set profile. Well, there's a limitation or an operational issue that occurs with that, because you might have a data set profile that covers multiple types of data sets, multiple data sets, I should say, of different types. Could be tape, could be sequential, could be PDSE. In those cases, you might want to choose to do encryption or not do encryption based upon the type of data set that it is. Now, I know we always said that you can go out and do pervasive encryption for data sets without application changes, and that's true for any data set that uses an access method. BSAM, QSAM, VSAM, things like that. But if you're doing your own I/O, directed I/O to a data set, you can't take advantage of access method encryption because you're not using an access method. If you want to do encryption there, you do have to put some stuff in your application. We've got APIs, or I should say our friends in DFP have the APIs to do that, but work is required to do that. And we had a strong need to go out and give folks the ability to segregate coverage of the encryption key based upon the type of data set. And that's what we're introducing in zOS 3.2. And let's see, there's going to be some new information in the DFP segment where you'll be able to include, exclude, or defer to SMS, system managed storage, the decision of whether to encrypt something or not. So on the add SD and alt SD commands, the new keyword is encrypt types, and your possible values are all, which means if it's covered by this profile, then we're going to ask DSS or DFSMS to do the encryption, right? No encrypt types removes the values that are stored in the dataset profile, right? But the values that allow you to do this specification are basically 3 different ones. In, which means include, X, which means exclude, or no. No means defer to DFSMS. So the 3 types of things you can do the in, X, and no for are tape, PDSE, or sequential, right? So obviously all is going to be mutually exclusive with the other values X and no. And if you get into some kind of situation where you specified a combination, you have some kind of mutual exclusiveness, you'll get a message that tells you about that. Now, list DSD will show you the value specified in this in the line that's labeled dataset types encrypted, and it'll simply tell you the options that are in effect. And if it's all, right, we'll tell you what that really means. Now, all of this is information that we store so that at the time of dataset creation, DFSMS can extract this information and then decide should this dataset be encrypted or not be encrypted. And then it does the stuff that it has been doing all along. All right, let's talk a little bit about zOS 3.1. Apple audit. We have had a long-standing requirement to allow the logging of applications, the use of a particular application during the logon process. Now, we'd always supported this for APPC applications, and it took just a little bit of work for us to extend it to all applications. So if you specify seturops Apple audit, right, and you have an Apple value specified on the request equals verify, you will, and you have asked for logging on the Apple profile. So those are the three things that have to happen, right? Then you can see the log record created for that logon. Remember, normally logons are not recorded, right, or not logged into SMF, TSO ones in particular. And when I say logged into SMF, I mean SMF type 80 records. There's always an SMF 30 record. But if you enable seturops Apple audit and you have an Apple equals specified on the request equals verify and on that Apple profile you've asked for logging, now you will see an SMF type 80 record in addition. There's a special control that we have for zOS Unix applications. These are applications which do a request equals verify with a session type of OMVS SRV. You can specify that you want to have logging for those applications in the new opt audit class. And you do that by specifying a switch profile. A switch profile is a profile for which the access list is meaningless. It just is a way of enabling something. And that new profile in the opt audit class is Apple audit for Unix, appleaudit.4.unix. And if you specify that, then what is going to happen, or create that profile, what's going to happen is that your zOS Unix applications will have SMF80 records created. You do need to have the RACF subsystem enabled. For those of you not familiar with the RACF subsystem, there is an address space that is used for lots of different things in RACF. It's not used for normal access control things, but it is used for things like directed commands and the RACF remote sharing facility. And if you want to do RACF operator commands from the MVS console, you have to have it. It's a great thing to have started. We talk about how to do it in the Systems Programmer's Guide. You need to have that enabled because we want all of the systems sharing that RACF data set aware when there's a change to the opt audit class. So what will happen is that subsystem will listen for ENF62 signals, which are the signals that RACF sends when a class is refreshed. One other change we did is SMF80 log-off records. Those are created by a RACROUT request equals delete, where logging was requested for that with the log equals keyword. Kix does that. I don't know too many other folks do. We now will put the Apple equal value that we used to create that ACE. It was the right thing to do. ACE custom fields is the other big thing that we did in zOS 3.1. Custom fields came in RACF many years ago, and the concept here is that you can define your own fields in user group dataset and general resource profile starting in zOS 2.4. We had a strong requirement driven by, Kix was probably the biggest one for this one, right? To allow you to take information that was in a custom field and put it in the accessor environment element in the ACE. And the reason you want to do that is so that a Kix application can interrogate that value. And prior to this, you had to do it with exits and it was a little bit cumbersome. But now you can do it very simply with a new ACEE keyword on the custom field or C field definition, right? So if you were defining a new field called EMPSER, on the user profile. You create a C field profile called user.csdata.empser, E-M-P-S-E-R. That's the name of your field. You give it information about its length, what data type it is, minimum, maximum values. And now you can specify ACEE yes. And what that instructs RACF to do is at the time that ACE is created for that user, we will take that value or whatever values you have specified that have ACE yes specified, and we will put them in the ACE. We'll actually hang them off the ACE in fetch protected key zero storage, so that it can be interrogated. Now, how do you interrogate it? There's a new option, new function code on the rget info. It's function code 3, get CS data from the ACE. The authority you need to use this, you have to either have FLAC authority, field level access control, so you can use that. If you're an authorized caller, APF system key or supervisor state, you can optionally skip the field level access checking. If you are an authorized caller, you can point us to an ACE and have us extract the custom field data from that ACE. So that's the rget info enhancements. All right, let's talk about some of the other things we've been doing through continuous delivery. And continuous delivery, again, is where we deliver some new functionality through the APAR PTF process. Before I talk about that, there's some breaking news here. zOS, we put zOS through the common criteria evaluation process. It's a long, laborious process. And zOS 2.5, yes, 2.5, completed its common criteria evaluation against the NIAP, National Information Assurance Partnership, OS Operating System Protection Profile, version 4.3. We did that in October. And the reason why it was 2.5 is you have to have the system generally available with all the functionality that was needed. zOS 2.5 had almost everything except something called validated boot. That came much later. Once we got validated boot in, we were able to do the evaluation. That completed, and we got the certificate shown here in beautiful Italian. Part 2 of that was we have now been placed on the NIAP Product Compliant List, or PCL. That's very breaking news. That happened yesterday. So yay, common criteria. Are we doing more common criteria stuff? Yes. Will we be doing common criteria evaluations on more current releases? The answer is yes. But everything has to be generally available, and then and only then can you start the process.
Mark.
Yes, question.
Question.
Yes.
Is the AC common custom field data compressed, i.e. impact on VLF use?
All right, so yeah, the question is the AC custom field information compressed? The answer is no. So custom fields was always intended for small pieces of information, a serial number, an address, some other kind of identity number. I have had folks say, we would love to put photos of people in, custom fields. No, my answer to that is not a good idea, because there are so many places in RACF that we really like having short bursts of data. So it is not compressed. If the requester has a particular type of information that they want to have in there, let's have a conversation. Could you compress it yourself? I'd have to think about that. All right. Any other questions? Good question.
Not at the moment. Thank you.
All right, let's move on. Identity token support. So in RACF, when you do a RAC request equals verify to create an ACE, it's a very stateless environment. You call the service, we either make the ACE and give you return code 0, or we fail it and say, no, you can't do that, and we don't create the ACE. That was great processing, but it turns out when you started doing things with multi-factor authentication, we had to make a change to that processing. And an identity token was the way we chose to do that. The concept here is in multi-factor authentication, you have a password in your head, and you have a token or you get a value generated by some kind of device. We'll just call that an authenticity token, right? That is those identity tokens are non-reusable, right? So what happens is you attempt to log on, you give your password, you give in that identity token on that RAC route request equals verify, and your password has expired. Oh, great. I have to now change my password, but I need to specify, because we're stateless, I need to specify that identity token that was returned earlier. Oh, wait a second, they're non-reusable. Doesn't work. Now, there were some creative ways to get around this, but the real way that we got around this was with the creation of an identity token. An identity token works this way. When that request equals verify, the initial one is done, an identity token is generated, and that can then be passed in on the subsequent rack route request equals verify. So we only have to process the MFA credential once and once only. So that makes request equals verify stateful and allows that replaying of that proof of authentication in this very limited circumstances. Now, we've had that support for several years now in zOS 3.1 and rolled back to prior releases with the APARs listed there. You can generate that IDT from an existing ACE, and you can generate and use an IDT for a protected user. There's a new keyword on the IDT parms, which is the segment in which you put this IDT information. And you could say, hey, will we allow this to be created for a protected user? Values are yes and no. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, very new, starting with zOS 3.1 and the service that we have here, we now have support for IDTs with RSA signatures and key labels managed in ICSF. Right. There's some changes to SMF records, which means that SMF unload is going to be changed. There's some new keywords in the IDT parms, which is where you specify the information about these IDTs that will be unloaded by database unload. All right, let's moving on. Passphrase change interval. So since we created passphrases years and years and years and years, probably 20 years now on passphrases. And for a password and a passphrase, there is an interval. Well, since a passphrase is a lot larger, you can see that you shouldn't have to change it as frequently. In fact, there's some standards bodies that said, no, you should let people leave their password phrase valid for a year or more. So now we have separated the password phrase, the password interval from the password phrase interval. They can be different values. Right, password, we stored the password interval as a single byte, which limited it at 254, basically an interval of that. For passphrase, we use something a little bit larger, and you can have a passphrase interval from 0 all the way to 65,534 years, days, or 179 years. My suspicion is that you're probably going to choose something a little bit less than that. Now, the password phrase interval can be specified at the system level with the seterops command, or at the user level with the password or the phrase commands. Now, interestingly, this is different. This is different from password intervals. A passphrase interval cannot be specified by the user. A password interval can be specified by a user, and what RACF does, it simply chooses the lesser of what the user has said and the system has said. So users can make more stringent for a password. They can't do that for a password phrase, and quite frankly, nobody that I know ever did that. But there is a health check RACF password control, and that will raise a different exception. Let's see, if the password phrase is greater than 365, that's only in zOS 3.1. We did not roll that back to earlier releases. The SMF 80 records have been updated to support the phrase and the password phrase information. The SMF 81 record has the password phrase interval, and SMF unload has been updated to support both of those. Now, if you are using RACF Remote Sharing Facility, RRSF, you have to make sure that all the systems sharing that RACF database are at the same level and have the support on them, most importantly. So make sure that all the systems have the support. If you have a down-level system, then what you're going to do is when the system, the RSF system connection is activated or enabled, becomes active, you'll get an IRR 0007I message saying, hey, we've got some different seterops options between these systems. SMF 1154, subtype 83. For those of us who've been around SMF for a while, it seems weird to be talking about SMF records greater than 255, but that support has been around for a fairly long time. And there is a component that is taking advantage of that, and that is the IBM Z Security and Compliance Center, or ZSCC. The way this compliance center works is at the time somebody is saying, I would like to know about my system configuration, a signal is set through all of the systems participating in that ZSCC environment. And upon receipt, systems like RACF or subsystems like RACF will generate an SMF 1154 record. Each component has its own subtype. RACF is 83. There are records out there for DB2, CICS, lots of other folks. We document the entire contents of that 1154 subtype 83 record in macros and interfaces. It is not processed by SMF unload. The consumer is intended to be somebody else. But what is in that record, should you want to process it yourself, you'll see 4 sets of information. The first one is called the summary information. That's kind of setter ops information, what options are specified. Then there are the RACF crit section. Never really like that title, but that's okay. These are really sensitive resources, right? General resources, bpx.superuser, things like that. Then there's the RACF APFL. The name implies that it is just the APF list. It's far more than that. It's the APF list, ParmLib, RACF datasets, ICSF datasets, and a few other things. And in all of these, we put information about the profiles associated with those. So we'll give you the UAC, the ID splat entry, warning, logging options, and stuff like that. The last one is the ACTL. These are authorized caller table entries that are in effect at your environment, at your system. I suspect none of you have any of these. For the astute reader who's looking at this information saying, wait, that looks a lot like information that comes out of the RACF sensitive resources check and a few of the other ones. Yeah, that's exactly what that information is modeled after. So SMF 1153 subtype 83. I'm just going to mention briefly, we have support for vSAM datasets as your RACF dataset. We introduced this in zOS 2.5 with a lot of limitations in 3.1 and with that APAR listed there, 62.267. We removed most of those restrictions, but you still have the restrictions that all your systems must be sharing the RACF database. All systems sharing the RACF database must have this support. You can't use master JCL to define your RACF dataset. You have to be in AIM stage 3, and your database should be free of internal errors before you move to vSAM. I do know of clients who have done this, and the reason to move to vSAM is so you can have an encrypted RACF vSAM dataset. Nothing else changes in terms of programming interfaces. If you'd like more information on this, I strongly encourage you to take a look at the GSE 2024, the real conference. There were 2 sessions, the Path to an Encrypted Database, the theory, that was my session, and then Lenny DeMock Bradshaw did the response called the Path to an Encrypted Database, the reality. A lot of practical, good advice coming from Lenny's session. I highly recommend it, and at GSE 2023, it was the best session award winner. Let's move on to another topic, special user ID revocation prompt. I love this t-shirt. This is an actual t-shirt that one of my colleagues got for his first grandson. My papa thinks I am RACF special. Absolutely love that. All right, so if you have a special user, right, and you have set a revocation count, so after 5 invalid logon attempts, sequential, I want this user ID revoked. When they attempt to do the 6th, they get revoked. But if they're special, right, we put a prompt on the console that says, Fred, a special user, has attempted to change his password. It has logged on with a bad password. Should we give him another attempt? And it's issued as a WTOR, a right to operator with reply. Right, so non-special users revoked immediately. Special users get that console message asking if they should be allowed another attempt. There's the message there. The operator says yes or no. Now, this worked great unless you happen to have a single-threaded application, which is running all of its logons through a single task, in which case now you're backing up all of the other logons to that application. So here's the support. There's an APAR. Rolled back all the way to 2.3, and it's in the base of 3.1, where you can specify that for a particular application, you do not want this prompt to go to the console. You want that special user revoked, right? Again, it's application by application, and the way you enable it, the way you enable this, don't prompt, just revoke immediately, is you define a profile in the xFacility class named irr.deny.special.user.additional.password.attempts.apple.apple name. Yes, we actually have a resource name that I think is a grammatically correct sentence. That may be a first for us. This is a discrete profile. You cannot put a splat value in for Apple name or any other value in here. The reason is we want you to do this only for those applications which have this requirement that says we can't allow the logon process to be interrupted or delayed by the operator prompt. I'm going to talk briefly about Erase on Scratch. This is nothing to do with RACF. This actually has to do with a DS8900 solid-state storage device. And they have a new facility called Unmap. Erase on Scratch addresses the issue that if you have a data set, you put data in it, you delete it, the deletion of the data set frees that space for use by others and deletes the entries in the volume table of contents and says, yeah, this space here is now available. If somebody else allocates that space, they have access to your old data. There's a RACF control, seterops erase. And if you seterops erase all, at the time that space is being released by DFSMS DFP, right, it's overwritten, right? But few clients have Erase on Scratch all enabled. There was a Bob Hansel survey that said it was, I seem to recall like 10% of clients doing that. And the reason is that if we're overwriting 0 or DFSMS is writing zeros, that ties up the device, that ties up the channel. What our friends in the storage subsystem world did is they came up with something called Unmap support. Because I know as systems programmers, we always think about cylinders and tracks, but cylinders and tracks haven't existed in the zOS concept, in the 390 type of concept for years. It's all emulated on some other type of device. So there's a mapping done between this cylinder, this head, this record, right, and some other piece of storage. That mapping, if you destroy the mapping, you destroy the ability to see the underlying data. And that's what Unmap support does with that particular firmware release 9.3.2. Right. And the advantage of this is you get a very, very substantial performance benefit over traditional Erase on Scratch. Now, a couple of things. Number one, and biggest restriction, does not apply to any data set in the form of any form of copy services relationship. That's a storage management way of copying data from one place to another automatically, right? Doesn't apply to those, but I was chatting with my friends in storage world, and if you go out and define a storage class, right, for temporary data sets, right, as an example, because temporary data sets, the only way to get them erased is with erase all, which means possibly more performance impact than you want, right? If you create a storage group that contains only those volumes with this support and say this is for temporary data sets, right, and you define the profile stgadmin.sms.dasdom.unmap.prefer in the facility class, then what's going to happen is that for all data sets on those volumes in that group, we will use the higher performance Unmap processing, and only if the Unmap processing fails will we go back to the older, slower, actually overwrite things. But wait, there's more, right? If it's a temporary data set and you have erase all enabled, actually, it is not in effect, then when the data set is deleted, its space will be unmapped. Right. Now, the difference here is if that unmap isn't successful, the data set doesn't get overwritten with zeros. So there's some serious performance advantages using the support. I'm just mentioning it because it's something to think about, and here's some documentation to help you think about it. Next item, if anybody here is sharing their RACF database with ZVM, starting with ZVM 7.3, nope, you can't do that. I know of only one client in the wild that's actually doing this. But yeah, this is a restriction. Come talk to us if you find yourself in this situation. Let's talk briefly about the CIS benchmarks for RACF. RACF has 2 iterations of the CIS benchmarks for zOS 2.5 with RACF out there. The CIS organization is a community-driven organization. They produce the CIS controls and the CIS benchmarks. Both of these are best practices for securing your systems and data. The one that we shipped has 219 recommendations across 9 domains. That's the URL to get a copy of it. More importantly, that's the URL to discuss the content of it, and we are in the midst of creating our next draft. Our next draft will not be specific to zOS 2.5. It'll just be the CIS benchmark for RACF and zOS. Right? So we're working on the new draft, and there is a session tomorrow. What are RACF's industry best practices? It's session VR5. It's at 3 p.m. Do check it out. Mr. Burke has been very, very involved in the creation of this latest draft, and he'd love to hear your comments. We have been driving as much as we can of DES out of RACF, giving you AES options for pretty much everything. Now you have it for PKCS 12 packages. In the past, if you tried to import one that was protected with PBES2, password-based encryption scheme 2, we said, no, you can't do that. Now it just works. That's nice. If you want to export a PKCS 12 package, there is a new keyword on the RACDSert export, PBE open paren AES. There are the APARs that will bring this into your environment already there for 3.1. Speaking of DES, our very passwords for our very switch and our very inact, they are stored in, using a DES-like algorithm, or excuse me, using a DES algorithm. One of the things that's a little bit different about this is you just don't have to know the password. You actually have to have console access to a zOS console. But we wanted to get DES out of the processing. So now there's a new KDF AES keyword on giving you the ability to define your switch and enact passwords using KDF AES. Support came out with the APAR there, 65905. Do not do this until all the systems sharing the RACF dataset are IPL'd with that support. Once you're sharing it, you only have to do this thing I'm going to talk about in a moment on one system in there. Note, you will need to do this before you move to zOS Next and change zOS Next to zOS 3.2. So if you don't have the support and do a setter ops list, that's what you see. Installation defined R-Very password is in effect. Or you see the message that says default. But fundamentally, this is the old message. Once you put the support on, what you will see is a different message. KDF AES password conversion is pending. See APAR number. First time we ever put an APAR number in a message, right? So this is a way of confirming you have the support. Once you have the support on all sharing systems, do the setter-ops R-Very password command for switch and status. Put the new values in there or put the old values in there. We really don't care. But do use the KDF AES keyword. That is our way of indicating you want this new processing. And now you will see the setter-ops list showing that, hey, not only do you have the installation defined one in place, but, oh, it's KDF AES. So that's how you can verify that you've completed the option. RACF for a while has had the ability to allow installations to say, I want password changes retrievable, right? Under the control of the security administrator. We now give the ability to specify stronger encryption using the Apple keyword in the RACF event class. All right. Oh, we're doing good on time. Couple of last things. Our good friends in SDSF have put a lot of fun function in. This is SDSF for zOS 3.1. where you can interrogate and list RACF options and profiles. Do check it out. If you want a lot of information on this, there was a session at the last GSE. Get the video. Rob Scott, 7 November 2024. The video is out there. It's worth looking at. I'm sure they've done, in fact, they have done some newer things. I'll let them talk about it when the time is right. All right, a couple of statements of direction to just take a quick look at. Validated boot. We delivered that, and we had to deliver that to get our OSPP common criteria evaluation. So we delivered that in 2023. In August, you can see how long it takes. It take almost 18 months to get through the evaluation process, and another 6 months to get on the product conformance list, the PCL. Encryption of tape data sets, the statement of direction to allow pervasive encryption for data sets. We talked about some of that with the new ENC types support a few moments ago. So that was our statement of direction and our piece of the support for that. We had a statement of direction about anomaly detection, notification, and quarantining. In September, we announced IBM threat detection for zOS, which is part one. Part one of that is detecting that something unusual has happened. And then part two is allowing you to take an action based upon that which was found. And that will be a quarantining action initiated from RACF. I can talk about that only because it was in the announcement letter for zOS 3.2. There wasn't a lot of detail, but you can think that, RACF is a natural throttle point for, you want to stop somebody. What better way than defining to RACF that whenever asked a question, maybe the answer should be no. So that's statement of direction, plus a little bit of insight into the 3.2 announcement. And then we have a statement of direction for simplifying the re-encryption of data once you've gone into the world of pervasive encryption. So I got 4 minutes left. All right. What questions have been backing up? I hope there are some.
You're out of luck, Mark.
Whoa.
No questions. But
all right.
Obviously people can allow themselves to unmute themselves. So
yeah, unmute. And while you're unmuting, there is something I did not talk about. It's not a RACF thing. It's a VSAM thing. So for those of you who are cognizant about the rules of VSAM, one of the rules is if you are opening a VSAM data set and you are in supervisor state or key 0, VSAM bypasses a call to RACF, right? With a particular APAR that came out relatively recently, you now have the ability to log when that occurs. You define a profile, I believe it's in the facility class, and you'll start seeing log records of applications which are doing that. And you might want to find out why are these applications doing that. All right. Anybody unmuting for a question?
there are a couple of comments. No questions, just comments.
Okay.
One is just overwhelmed.
Understandable.
And obviously for everything that you do, it's, as Aileen has said, it's a tsunami of information. It'd take a while to get their heads around it all. So
that's perfectly fair, and then part of that is it's a 45-minute session. Part of it is I chose to cover a lot of material, but if you have any questions on any of this, my email address is right on the front. Do contact me, and I'd be happy to talk about this stuff in any more detail. All right then. First, wow, ending on time. That's a rarity for me. I'm buying a lottery ticket. I always appreciate the session feedback. I hope to get invited back. I hope to be there in November. Never take anything for granted.
perfect. So please do submit your feedback for this session 7J. And thank you very much, Mark, for helping us out. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. It's, as I said, a lot of information, but
there is a lot, and love talking about it. Love talking with you guys. It was a great conference. Thank you again for putting all the work in.
thank you very much, guys. Thank you. Cheers, everybody.